Okay, we're live. Good morning. My name is Greg Norris. This is episode 1 of Eschatology Talk, and I am joined today by Larry Pierce. Hello, Larry.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us.
Hello. There.
Larry, give me a second to set this up why I requested this meeting with you in this interview, if that would be all right with you.
Okay.
About 5 years ago, I started having an opportunity to interact with the Jewish community in Orlando, Florida. I spoke to a conservative rabbi there, and I had a lot of interactions with him that really surprised me. I was very ignorant on what modern day Judaism had become. And when I started digging deeper, I guess the only way I can describe it is I became troubled in my spirit. I felt like something was wrong about what I had been taught about eschatology. So I started digging for answers. And one of the primary sources that helped me find some of those answers was a work by James Ussher called Annals of World History. And Larry Pierce was instrumental in modernizing it. I guess I'm not sure that's the right word, but he updated it in conjunction with Answers in Genesis. And he's here today to help us understand what this work is and why Christians should consider buying the book, and what answers it might have for you that would help you understand eschatology a little bit better. Okay. Larry, could you give us a brief introduction to maybe your career and why you were chosen to update James Ussher's work?
I've always had an interest in history, and well, what more can I say except that Ken Ham invited us to do it, and he sent down a bunch of some people down to the University of Cincinnati with a bunch of dimes, and they were able to photocopy the English copy and the Latin copy of Ussher's Annals of the World. As far as we can know, the English copy was done 2 years after Ussher's death, and it wasn't done by Ussher himself, as I'll explain later on in the book itself. Go ahead.
Now, Larry, you're a pretty humble guy, so I'm going to have to draw it out of you a little bit. You and your wife work together on this project, right? And you are able to read Latin and Greek and Hebrew.
No,
as well?
I can't read Greek or Latin or Hebrew. Well, I can read a little bit of Latin, but I've had high school Latin and university Latin, and that's about the extent of it.
Okay.
As for Greek and Hebrew, well, I know enough to be dangerous.
Okay.
I know where the scholars are, let's say that, so I know how to basically get the answers. It's like
Right.
Henry Ford. He says, you haven't had a university degree in this stuff. Well, he pulled out $10 and said, for $10 I can get any answer I want just by talking to the right person.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. How long did it take you and your wife to work on this project of updating James Ussher's work?
About 5 years.
About 5 years. And if you wouldn't mind, give the audience a description. I know that it's not a minor project. You guys had to get permission to see very old documents to verify that James Ussher had done his work well and had recorded the correct dates. Am I describing the process accurately? I mean, this involved thousands of documents, right?
Yeah, if you can take a look at 1,000 were biblical, and about 11,000 or 12,000 were secular, and of about the 11,000, I was able to look up. Let's see, where is this? Plenty. The Loeb Classical Library. Can you see that?
I can see Pliny. Yes.
Pliny. Okay.
Pliny. Okay.
Well, friends, we picked up the Loeb Classical Library, which was done about 140 years ago. Over a period of time, they're still working on it, and they have republished all the ancient writers. So we published those things with respect to Ussher, so that all the footnotes would match Ussher's footnotes. These are what classical scholars use today. There's all these books. There's about 500 of them sitting on the shelf.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, those are mostly secular works that are
Those are all secular works.
all secular. Okay. And James Ussher, he integrated both biblical history and the secular timelines to come up with his work, the Annals, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Why would a modern day Christian want to purchase this book and see what's in there? Because I own the book. It's a pretty intimidating book. What other use would you get out of it other than reading ancient history?
Basically, reading ancient history. If you like ancient history, this gives you the scope more than you'll get in any history book. You'll find that. Remember, I took grade 11 history, which was ancient history and included ancient history, and I went through the 4th century A.D. or B.C. and I discovered that the chap that wrote the history book for grade 11 had a definite agenda as opposed to the ones that the ancient writers wrote.
Okay.
So that find an accurate history of ancient history in here, except for the period beyond 700 BC.
Okay. In regards to eschatology and the information that a Christian might be able to get from Ussher's work, I'm particularly interested in Daniel 9 and Daniel 9's 490-year prophecy. According to Ussher's work, the final 7 years of the 490-year prophecy was primarily about Jesus. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you expound upon that a little bit? What did James Ussher find when he was piecing together this history and trying to track down the 490 years? What began the final 7 years and what ended it and what happened in the middle?
Well, what happened initially is Ussher found out that Xerxes had made Artaxerxes viceroy in 474 BC approximately. I think that was the age when it was. And that's when the Jews dated their reign from, and that's when you date the 70 weeks from. And on the 20th year of Artaxerxes, which would basically be 554 BC, you find that, oops, pardon me, our pussycat here is wandering through. Basically Ussher discovered that Egypt was at war with Persia, and there was a tremendous conflict going on, including 1 million men through the area of Palestine that the Persians had rummaged, basically gone through. In 445 BC, which is normally the starting date which follows Ptolemy's canon, you find that basically the Persian Empire was at peace. There was nothing going on. As for the 469th week, at the end of that week, you find the start of Jesus' ministry, and in the middle of the week, you find that his crucifixion date occurred. And as for the rest of the week, because it's measured in weeks, you don't care about what happened that time.
Okay, now you said a date. I think you might have accidentally misspoke. You said 554 BC.
454 BC.
Right, 454 BC. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that so that nobody gets confused. So according to what Ussher found, the 490 years of Daniel 9's prophecy begins in 454 BC and ends approximately around 26 AD. Is that correct?
No, it ends around 33 AD.
I'm sorry. 33 AD.
John the Baptist started.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm confusing myself now. And the 33 and the 454 together equals 490. So that.
No, it doesn't. It equals 487, I think. It's 4 years short. But I said the measurement of units is a year. Pardon me, not a year, but a week. So as long as it's within the week, it's fine.
Okay. That's interesting because I guess the prophecy is 490 years. If it began in 454 BC, it seems like the final year of the final 7 years would have to be 36 because 454 plus 36 equals 490.
Yeah, they said you don't, if you send a guy out with a foot ruler to measure our driveway, you don't expect measurement in yards.
I'm not following you.
All right. Just because basically the unit of measure is a week. All right, it's 7-year period.
Right.
So as long as it happens within that 7-year period, it's fine.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying correctly, in biblical thinking, as long as something occurs within that week, it's considered to have.
Within that unit of measure, and the
Okay.
unit of measure happens to be 7 years.
Right. Okay. And Daniel 9:27, we spoke about this briefly before we started this interview. It talks about in the midst of the week, somebody would interrupt the sacrifices and would confirm a
Basically,
strong covenant.
Christ would put an end to the sacrifices and the obligation that were going on in the temples. Like they were no more efficacious as far as the Jews are concerned.
Right. And I'm trying to remember. I think Ussher, if I remember correctly, stated that the final 7 years began on the Passover of AD 30. Am I remembering that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. So the final 7 years, we have Jesus beginning his ministry in AD 30. He visits the temple and tells the disciples that, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left upon another within this generation. And then 3 years later, approximately, Jesus is crucified. And then after his crucifixion, Jesus is returning, which is a part of him confirming the covenant for the 1 week that Daniel 9:27 speaks of, because it says that he will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Am I understanding that correctly?
Let me just see here. My understanding of the last week is this: basically, Jesus started his public ministry at 30 A.D. He finished at 33.5 A.D. with his crucifixion date. He also, at that same point, described the temple and Solomon ruin, which occurred in 70 A.D. through Titus and his troops.
Okay. All right. So let's. Sounds like we're having a disagreement there, but one of the most important or most interesting parts I found about what you did when you worked on Ussher's work was in the appendixes. In the appendixes, you show how the Jewish Talmudic works altered their history in order to push forward the date of Daniel's 490-year prophecy towards their false messiah named Bar Kokhba.
Yeah, Jones, Mr. Jones did that work, and we just followed his work exactly. We just copied it in basically what he had written.
Okay. I guess the reason I wanted to bring that up and let anybody who might eventually get the chance to listen to this interview, I thought that was really significant, because if the Pharisees were trying to distract the early believers that the 490-year prophecy wasn't about Jesus Christ, that is another evidence of the final week of Daniel being about Jesus Christ, because they were trying to push that forward to their false messiah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found that to be a very interesting.
Yeah, they collapsed the Persian period from about 200 years down to about 35 years. That's how they did it. That's the main indication of how they did it. As far as the age of the earth, they came up with the wrong date based on common errors that people have made down through the centuries.
Right, and that's an interesting part too. Is that when I was interacting with the rabbi in Orlando, I found out that they have a different dating system than Ussher did as far as the age of the earth. And me being a little bit naive, and I didn't understand the things that had transpired, I assumed too quickly and wrongly that they had the correct beginning date of the earth.
Well,
Go ahead.
they don't. They're out by at least 60 years in the time of Abraham.
Right. And they're also off, obviously, where they changed the date that would have referred to Jesus Christ, which is what Daniel 9 was about.
Well, we've documented, well, Dr. Jones has documented all those things in his section that we included in Appendix G of Ussher.
Okay. Okay. In my conversations with you, and this leads to the next work that you also worked on for Answers in Genesis, you found out that Isaac Newton had done a work as well, and I believe Answers in Genesis hired you to update this one as also. And Isaac Newton had found some flaws in James Ussher's work. Can you tell us a little bit about Isaac Newton's work and your part in that?
Well, Ussher basically assumed that the ancient writers were accurate between 700 BC and back to the time of creation. He basically indicated he had the wrong period of he had the wrong period for the pharaohs, and he also had the wrong period for the great deluge that occurred in Greece, and also the fall of Troy.
Okay, and what again was Isaac Newton's work that you worked on? What's the name of it?
The Revised History of the Ancient Kingdoms.
Okay. Now, one question I had for you, because when I purchased that book and I was thumbing through it, and I haven't had a lot of time to extensively look at it, but does what Ussher found, does it change the ultimate beginning date that Ussher found?
Oh, it doesn't.
Okay, so it just shifts certain dates of certain
empires.
It
shifts certain dates, and Ussher himself has indicated in his preface that he relied on the ancient writers, and if they were wrong, he was wrong, period.
Okay, that's an interesting fact. Just out of curiosity, has Answers in Genesis ever considered combining those two works so that we have something that's accurate, or are they going to content to leave them separate?
They're content to leave them separate as works by themselves.
All right. I also wanted to ask you some questions about Bible translations, because that's another thing that I had ran across when I really started understanding some of these issues that divides particularly American Christendom. I found out that in the early 1800s, there's a couple guys named Westcott and Hort who seem to have sold at least a lot of Protestant denominations on the idea that the majority text slash Textus Receptus ancient works that we had used to make our Bibles with were somehow not the most accurate. And they had found what they claimed to be an older and more reliable and more authoritative scripts they called the minority critical texts, which were the Alexandrian, Sinaiticus, and forgetting what the last one was, Vaticanus. Those three works, I believe, is the bulk of what they used in order to make their New Testament that they claimed was more authoritative than the Textus Receptus that we got from Erasmus. Can you give us your thoughts on this minority text movement that was started by Westcott and Hort and the Bibles? Almost every modern Bible these days, past King James, was based upon this minority text. Do you trust their work?
Absolutely not. Just because the work is older doesn't mean that the text is older, that is old as the document. For example, suppose you found the works of Shakespeare and you found inside the cover page 1989. You'd assume that would you assume that the text is older than in 1989?
No.
No, I mean, it makes no sense, all right? It dates back many hundreds of years. And the same thing with the majority text. Just because the text is on newer manuscripts doesn't mean the text itself, the age of it, is different. It means that it is much older than what we find in the Westcott and Hort text.
Right, and as I understand it, the majority text is in some 500 different languages, and to my understanding, those largely agree with very minor differences between them. Is that your understanding as well?
That's my understanding also, that the basically variation is spelling variations.
Right, okay. Just for the sake of the audience, which Bible translation do you prefer to use the most?
Well, the old King James, believe it or not, is still the most accurate. And we've proven that by basically our analytical Bible that we've been working on for the Old Testament since 2006.
Mm-hmm.
The newer translations, even though the Hebrew is the same, have changed the meaning considerably. And I'll give you an example. Let's see. Can you turn to 2 Chronicles 5:26?
Okay, give me a second.
Like here's where the Hebrew is the same, all right? And they changed the meaning.
I'm on 2 Chronicles 5, and it seems to only go to verse 14.
5:26. 1 Chronicles 5:26 is what I meant to say.
Okay, let me go back there. All right, I'm there.
All right, you find that in that verse it says, "Pull the king of Assyria." That I'm reading from the New King James. "Pull the king of Assyria." That is Telgath-Pileser, king of Assyria. They have those kings are basically the same kings. Whereas if you read in Ussher and you read in secular history, including Herodotus, which is very renowned for its accuracy, you find that those are two different kings.
Okay.
And also in 1 Corinthians, or pardon me, 1 Kings 23:29. Just a minute here. Pardon me, 2 Kings 23:29. It said in the New King James, "In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went to the aid of a king of Assyria to the river Euphrates." All right, it's where it says that.
Mm-hmm.
You find that in the Hebrew, it could be to the aid of or to against. All right, and it means just exactly that, against. In fact, if you study Herodotus, you'll find that the Egyptian king went up against the king of Assyria because they had a conflict going on between them, a little war between them. So here in this case, they bowed to modern historical conjectures without consulting the ancient writers. Ussher always went back to the original footnotes wherever possible. So that's one thing that I've learned very distinctly in Ussher's work, is that the importance of the original footnotes.
Okay. Now, I'm not really completely following you as to the importance of those two scriptures you just gave us. Could you give us a little brief synopsis of that one more time? Why are those two differences important?
Well, they indicate that the Hebrew is the same and it conflicts with ancient history. All right, the Hebrew is the same for the way the New King James says it as the way the old, which is the same way the Authorized Version says it, in some that we have that relates to the 1769 edition.
Okay.
So here the Hebrew is the same, and they've translated differently, and they've translated incorrectly. Period. Why would you translate them when they have? Why would you check? Why would you consider their authority when they have different Greek texts to work from? This is exactly the same Hebrew text.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so the modern text, not the King James Version,
and not only have they changed the Greek, but they've changed the Hebrew to match what they think has happened.
And that would probably lead someone to believing that the conflict between the North and the South, I think, I'm trying to remember which prophecy that was, but that probably would be referring to that war that the Bible prophesied between the North and the South occurring, because that would alter that text.
It would alter that text, and it doesn't take long before you could track down Herodotus, which is a Greek historian, or any other ancient writers, to verify that is indeed the case.
Okay. That's kind of an interesting lead into what I was going to speak about or ask you about next. And that's, I've been reading another author named David Berceau. and he has spent a lot of his extra time as a lawyer studying the early church fathers. And one of the things that I learned from him that kind of surprised me was that I had, when Erasmus and the early reformers decided to make an English Bible, they decided to go back to the original text rather than using the Latin Vulgate or the Greek Septuagint. And from my understanding, one of the things that David Berceau showed me was that the Masoretic texts that the Jews were using, written in Hebrew, that they had altered certain prophecies that spoke very poignantly against not only God coming to judge them for their apostasy, but also the prophecies referring to the Messiah. And they were aware of these differences in the Masoretic text. And on these particular texts, they had to go back to the Greek Septuagint to get the correct translation. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I won't be able to spend a lot of time talking about that then. But I thought that was interesting that the early reformers, if what David Berceau is telling us is true, they were making an effort to change the Hebrew texts so that we couldn't understand the prophecies as well. And they were aware of it, and they transferred to the Greek Septuagint, where they were aware of those issues.
Let me give you an example of the modern texts which vary.
Okay.
Erasmus had problems with the Book of Revelation, and you find that most of the changes occurred in the Book of Revelation that are found in the majority text. And the reason is because he translated basically in many cases, the Latin Vulgate back into Greek in order to reconstruct the Book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm. I have heard that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've studied that. Okay. In our conversations together leading up to this interview, I was interested in the 1769 Blaney revision of the King James Version and how he had seemingly incorporated what appeared to be, at least at first glance, Ussher's dating system. But I was disturbed when I found out that it parted from Ussher's system when it came to key texts that referred to, like, especially Jesus's beginning of his ministry and some other things. And you were telling me that the dates that were used in the Blaney revision weren't Ussher's, but a man named Lloyd. Could you tell us about that?
Well, Lloyd lived around the 1700s, and he basically was the first person to put the dates into the authorized version of the Bible. And the reason it's called the authorized version is because you need a special license in England to publish that Bible. An example would be in 2035, King Henry VIII granted the King's printers the perpetual patent for all stuff that they printed. Now, the English have had a very difficult time, and I no longer have to explain this, but they've had a very difficult time explaining this to European Common Union. It differs from a copyright, and it differs from a patent, a hardware patent. Basically, it goes on forever, and as long as England exists, you are required to pay 5% to the Crown for every copy of the King James or authorized version that you are produced. That's why it's called the authorized version, because you are authorized to produce it.
Okay.
A little known fact. Ironically, we were granted an exemption from that, and Cambridge, which is basically where the location of the Queen's printers is, actually came to us and asked for the accurate text, and they found that our text was indeed accurate, the one that they had used.
Okay.
Because they themselves did not have an electronic text.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can I ask you, do you have any idea why Lloyd decided to depart from Ussher's dating system?
He only parted, as far as I know, in the New Testament he parted. It depends on who dates the Bible, all right? But in the Old Testament he found that Rachel and Leah had different dates assigned to them. If you take a look at those books and take a look at those chapters in Genesis, I think it's chapter 29. Rachel seems to be married 7 years after Leah was married. And you read the context and that makes sense, all right? Until you start to figure out how all these children could be born within the time period allotted for them. And that's when you find that Rachel was married within 7 days or a week of Rachel, where Leah was being married. So that's where you have the dates changed of 14 years down to 7 years.
Okay.
But it doesn't change the overall dating method of the entire Bible.
Well, I'm trying to remember in the back of at least the edition I have, and I'm not sure I have an original. I bought a 500th anniversary edition of the 1769 Blaney revision, and it had the dates in it. And I found that somewhere around probably the period of Daniel's prophecies, that they switched the Old Testament dates, and that could be a change that they've made in just the updated version. It may not be original. I don't have an original 1769 Blaney edition with the dates in it. I would really like to get a hold of one, but currently I don't have one to see if they have altered it in the new updated version of it, at the 500th anniversary edition of it.
The dates were not present in the original Bible period in 16.
Right. I understand that. I would just like to know at some point, if possible, if the 1769 version that incorporated Lloyd's dates has the same dates as I'm seeing in the updated 500th anniversary edition of it. I'm not sure that they were true to the original dating system. And when I look at the Bible that I have in front of me, that's the updated Blaney 1769 edition, there's many dates altered from Ussher's timeline. And in particular, the one that I thought was most misleading was they dated the book of Revelation at AD 95. Now, as far as I understand, the majority report until the 1800s was that the book of Revelation was written before the fall of Jerusalem. It's probably somewhere around AD 65. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay, and
in fact, all the books of the New Testament were written before 70 AD.
Okay, I agree with that, but
the very fact that none of the books mentions the fall of Jerusalem, which was a major city. In fact, it was the third major city in the Roman Empire between Rome and Alexandria
right.
and Jerusalem. They were the three big cities of Jerusalem, or big cities of the Roman Empire.
Right. The reason I bring that up is because I found that one of the most perplexing part is I'm trying to study eschatology and fit this puzzle piece together that seems to be so distorted. One of the major pieces of the puzzle in understanding what the book of Revelation is all about is understanding when it was written. Because if it was written after AD 70, it probably wasn't about the destruction of Jerusalem and God coming to judge Israel for their apostasy and rejection of the Messiah. But if you believe that the book of Revelation was written before AD 70, then it becomes much more apparent that what the book of Revelation is actually about is exactly what I mentioned: God coming in judgment upon Israel.
Let me get me a book in my library. Okay, just a second, please. Can you see the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Kenneth Gentry's book. It's an excellent book. I own it.
All right, you own it. All right. Well, then you know exactly where basically the dating is coming from. Let me put this book back.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered most of what I wanted to ask you about. I wanted to give you a chance to plug your work that you're doing currently, that I think is in progress. You're doing an online Bible where people can. Well, I'll let you describe it. What is the work that you're working on?
Well, what you can see is, whoops, a minute here. Let me share the screen with you.
I'm not sure.
That screen?
I cannot see it. Share screen. I'm still a little new to using this. I don't know how to allow you to take over with your screen. I don't see the ability to do that, honestly. Can you just tell us the website?
I don't have it out there on the website yet.
Okay.
Dear, you should be able to start sharing. Now, can you see the screen?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. You see basically the Old Testament Hebrew, all right, with the variation in the numbers. In this case, it happens to be Isaiah 64 verse 5 is the Hebrew verse numbering, and the English verse numbering Isaiah 64 verse 6. So we're out by one verse number, and in the Psalms that happens a lot. So what we've done is we've included the English translation, all the Strong's numbers. Can you see that?
I can see that.
Let me explain. Let me make this a little bigger. Under Skype, everything goes slowly. All right. Can you see the Strong's numbers a little clearly here?
Yes,
We
I can.
included an exhaustive list of Strong's numbers, complete analytical information for that particular verb or that particular Hebrew word, in which case it's a conjunction, and it's number 1961, which is Strong's. He basically did a numbering scheme of the Bible back in the late 1800s. It's amazing that it took him 27 years to do it, and a fire would have wiped him out. You know, I can do it now in about less than a minute on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have the English translation. It's exactly the same as the literal translation that you have from the Hebrew, and you have all the Strong's numbers, and the only difference is the punctuation, comma, and capitalization, and sometimes we put in ampersand markers, indicates that the word is implied from the Hebrew, and here percent means it's difference in the number. So it means rag in the Hebrew, it means rags in the, but we translate it as rags in English because it makes more sense. So here is the entire Old Testament. Basically, we've done that, and we're just finishing off the proofing of it, and hopefully we'll have that done in another few months, and then the Old Testament will be released. The New Testament will be a piece of cake compared to the Old Testament. Let me show you the concise lexicon, or the lexicons that are derived from it. It looks like that thing is not, what should I say, not disciplined or not ordered in any particular fashion, but it is strictly ordered. You find that each translation is, each translation of the word is in italics, where italics indicates word supplied by the author. Oops, I've been here. Here, just let me go. So here we have the English Hebrew, which is basically the word, all right. And here's the Hebrew word for it. It occurs 36 times, and occurs 13 times as that, and 23 times as that. And that indicates exactly where all the references are. And here's the concise lexicon, where basically world 36 noun, feminine singular. It's 30. Basically says 36 times. Mm-hmm. So if you float your cursor over that, you get all the meanings for the word noun, feminine, singular. Let's see.
So your tool that you've created will allow people to
basically allow people to study the Hebrew without wasting 4 years at Hebrew college.
That sounds like a worthwhile tool that you're working on.
And hopefully we'll do the New Testament, but the New Testament will put all the pieces put together, mm-hmm. and it's just a matter of reformatting. Whereas you do Old Testament to start from scratch.
Right. Okay. All right, Larry. Well, is there anything that you wished I would have asked you about either James Ussher's work or Newton's work that I didn't ask?
Just a minute. Let's stop sharing here. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay. All right. We've stopped sharing. No, as I said, if people want to buy them, fine. If they don't want to buy them, that's fine too. Basically, these things are meant for ancient historians who want to read about the ancient history. Newton's work is interesting in that, like a prosecuting attorney, he sure shows you exactly where the ancient kingdoms made their mistakes, and then he shows you how to correct them.
Yeah.
That is genius indeed. And for him, this was just an idle diversion.
I remember you saying that. One of the things I think I mentioned to you that I found very interesting is that when you take a look at his corrections to the timeline and you start to realize that Darius is one and the same person as Artaxerxes, and that Esther was married to Xerxes, Darius's father.
No, Esther was married to Darius. Darius Hesperides.
Was okay, maybe I'm getting confused. Is Darius the same person as Xerxes, or is it the same as Artaxerxes?
No, Xerxes was the son of Darius.
Artaxerxes was the son of Darius?
Yes.
Okay, so I had the two backwards. So
an example you can find out quite quickly. If you take a look at Esther, you find that Darius imposed a tax on all the empire, including the Isles. He's referring to the Greek islands at that point. All right, and that tax occurred in 497 BC, thereabouts, approximately, as opposed to Xerxes. Xerxes lost control of all those islands in 480 BC, which was the 6th year of his reign. And it says that in the 12th year of Darius's reign, he basically levied this tax. And it's interesting if you find in Ussher the reference to that. What he did is he had his henchmen go out and impose an enormous amount of tax on these people. And they would complain to Darius and say, you know, this terrible. This king is going to. These people are going to impose this terrible tax. There's no way we can afford to pay it. So Darius would cut the tax in half. Everybody'd be happy and everybody would praise Darius. And Darius, he would only plan to come up with half the tax anyway. So
he's a bit of a trickster, huh?
He was a trickster. In fact, he was called the huckster of ancient history for his practice of levying taxes.
So Esther was actually married to Darius, which is one and the same person as Artaxerxes. Do I have that straight?
No, Artaxerxes was the son.
Okay, and Artaxerxes is the one whose reign the 490 years of Daniel 9 begins, correct?
It begins in part. It also begins in part because Artaxerxes was made viceroy with Xerxes.
Right. Okay. So Esther was married to Darius, which is the same as Xerxes, and their son.
No. Darius Hesperides. Totally different person.
Okay, I think I've blown it on this one. I think I have to go back and read it. For some reason, the significant thing I thought was interesting is I thought that I had understood that there was a possibility that Esther was Artaxerxes' mother. No. Okay, then I misunderstood something.
No, he could have been his grandmother.
It could have been his grandmother. Okay. All right. Well, that's still interesting. That's interesting that.
Well, you'll find all this explained in Newton's book.
Okay, I'll have to recheck it out and make sure I get that straight.
Newton goes through the Greek Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Assyrian and the various empires, and he explains all this in detail.
Okay.
Also, the work of Newton's work, we rewrote it. But we also rewrote a perfect index for it. I mean, perfect, completely perfect. Every proper noun is included, so you can look up every proper noun, and you can find exactly what Herodotus or what Newton meant. Newton could keep all this stuff in his mind. None of us are that smart and can do it. So, in fact, the index to Newton's work is just as important as the work itself. And the index is actually larger than the original work.
Okay. You know what? I remember a topic I wanted to ask you about that I failed to mention, and it's in regard to the Apocrypha books. All the denominations I've been involved in as an adult have always excluded the Apocrypha in America, and that was one of the things I found fascinating about Isaac Newton's work, is he was describing the lineages of these kings. And when I was reading, I think it was Esdras refers to a prior Babylonian king that I was unfamiliar with. I think it was Nebuchadnezzar or something like that. And I thought that maybe that was a misspelling or a derivation of Nebuchadnezzar. But then when I looked in Isaac Newton's work, it actually explained that that was a previous Babylonian king. So it kind of fit some pieces together for me about the Apocrypha.
Well, the Apocrypha is no more important than Josephus or these Greek or Latin books that you can see that are on our shelf. Oops. Here. Yeah, there we go. It gives a little better representation.
Right.
So the Apocrypha is basically just a secular book of history in which you take it with a grain of salt. It's the most important period is it straightens out the chronology for Ezra, which is a real mess, all right, to say the least. And it also gives you a very accurate history of the first Maccabees, of the Maccabean period that Josephus copied extensively.
Okay. All right.
Yes, the second Maccabees, well, third and fourth,
Okay. I'm still working through the Apocrypha books myself. It's the first time I've ever read them, because I've always been told that they were not very worthwhile works, and I'm starting to disagree with that position.
Historically, the first Maccabees is important, and also Ezra's first chapter of the first Ezra is important. The other books are of dubious value.
Right.
The Jews themselves did ignore them. In fact, let me see. I've got the Apocrypha here somewhere on my shelf. Whoops. Books just fell all over the place. All right, I had reasons in here in the Apocrypha. Jesus never considered them part of the canon. Christ rejects them, considers the canon as the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. Never quoted from in the Bible. Unreliable and contradict known facts from the Bible. Example, prayers for the dead, page 2, in this case, page 265.
Yeah, I've heard that, but the one thing that I thought was interesting when I was starting to really start to read a little bit about it, I can't say that I'm really well educated on it yet. I'm trying to get there. But men like Martin Luther and Calvin, who were two very important reformers, they didn't feel the need to exclude those books. They included them in their Bibles, but obviously as lesser works. And the second thing I found that was very interesting is that it seemed like the interesting about the Apocrypha books is it contains the language and explains the language of the apocryphal books in some ways that other books of the Bible don't. It's like it helps you get familiar with this literary genre of Jewish writings that helps you better understand these books that seem so mysterious to us today because we don't understand the symbolism that was being used. Can you confirm or disaffirm that?
As far as we know, the Apocrypha was written in Greek. I have no opinion as far as the value of the particular works go in themselves, except for First Ezra and Maccabees. They are of historical importance.
Let me ask you. I mean, because you just said that Esdras was written in Greek, but Esdras was during the Babylonian period. Am I correct?
It was written in Greek. The copies that we have of the Apocrypha are all written in Greek.
Okay, that's interesting because it's describing the exiles in Israel in the not the Babylonian. It was I'm sorry, I'm saying it correct. It's during the Assyrian, right? Isn't this the Assyrian
the
exile?
Persian period.
Okay, then I have it confused. All right, well, I've got some more work to do. Well, Larry, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm a seeker, and I don't pretend to have it all figured out, obviously, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us what you have learned and your participation in this important work, I think.
Well, we've had a lot of fun in doing it. The biggest thing we learned about ancient history is the fact that we don't know very much about it.
Right.
I mean, people who claim to know a lot about ancient history, well, the number of the preachers that I've come across that have stumbled on Josephus saying Josephus said this, Josephus said that. Josephus said none of the things he said, period. So I can only shake my head.
When you say that Josephus did not say those things, can you expound upon that a little bit?
No, I can't. Basically, he, I forget lies very quickly.
So it sounds like you're saying that people have put words in Josephus's mouth, and that they're trying to claim that he said things that he did not. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay, that doesn't surprise me. I'm finding things that are very suspicious when I'm trying to research these things that I have found astonishing. So I can give you one example. I have a Matthew Henry commentary, and I have about 4 different versions of it now. And the only one I trust is the one that says it's complete and unabridged, because I start comparing some of the newer versions of Matthew Henry's commentary when I come to scripture like Daniel 9, and they're including dispensational teachings in Matthew Henry's commentary, and Matthew Henry lived before dispensationalism was birthed. So somebody's putting words in Matthew Henry's mouth.
Yes, they indeed are.
So it's interesting that we're having to be careful about what our resources are, and I'm learning I have to go back to as old as possible and as close to the original source.
That's what Ussher and Newton learned about long ago. As far as Newton's work goes, I mean, it would have earned him several PhDs at least in modern history, just compared to the work he did. And he just did this for an idle diversion while he's working away in the mint.
Very interesting. All right, there. Well, thanks again for your time. I don't want to keep any longer, but thanks again for helping us understand our Bibles a little bit better and the history.
All righty. Cheerio.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.